ゴルの軍では日本の武士が思ってたより強くて、このまま戦いが長引けばやられてしまうので戻ろうっていうような会議も開かれたって記録されてるらしい。
What?
That's the first time an Asian country beat a major European, a white country. And that's like a serious thing from like a Western perspective because there is a lot of racism, racial prejudice.
みんなの国でこの勉強するときに原爆のことについてってどんな感じで扱われる？
It's written from a very subjective perspective. I think in the war, it's just.
こんにちは、全人類と友達になるのが僕がミスターウジです。そして
そうです。
あです
It's me, Byron. This.
アーロンです。
今日のテーマは
Pudding!
日本だけの歴史上の出来事について。
Aaron Sensei! Aaron Hakase!
今日もよろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いいたします
Today, we're going to be talking about events that changed the course of Japanese history.
今日もね、歴史オタクのアーロン先生。
You have to call him that.
歴史教授。
歴
Yeah,
史教
dude,
授。
come on. Do you call your professor a rekishi otaku?
はい。
歴史オタク。先生は大体オタクなのよ。歴史オタクのね、まあアーロン先生にいろいろ教えてもらおうと思います。はい、アーロンは大学で歴史を専攻、大学院か。歴史を専攻してたくらい、まあ、歴史ラブであり、まあ、今日もその日本の歴史について、まあ、外国人の目線からというか、まあ、海外の目線からここ面白いなっていうところをピックアップしてもらったので、それを話してもらいたいと思います。今日もこの歴史弱者の私富士にいろいろ教えてもらう、勉強にもなる、日本のこと知れる、楽しい、はい、まあ、そんな回になっておりますので、よければお付き合いください。それではLet's find out!
1個目、
だれ
モンゴルとの戦い。
元寇だね。モンゴルはその時元って言われてたから、まあ、それが日本にアタックかけた時の話。
Yeah. When did this happen? The 13th century, right? So the Mongol invasions to Japan were two main invasions, right? But they both happened in the 13th century, the 1200s. And so the big thing here is the Mongol Empire was the biggest empire the world has ever seen in history. Think about it. It reached from where Mongolia is now, like Central Asia, all the way to Hungary, to like Eastern Europe. This huge swath of area, the biggest empire the world has ever seen. But the only country that managed to fend them off?
Japan!
Japan, dude, yeah.
What? How?
Think about that. Yeah. Basically what happened was the Mongol Empire, they were, wreaking havoc all over the place. Yep. And they set their eyes on Japan. And they said, we're going to go. And then so they launched a few invasions from the Korean peninsula into northern Kyushu, and also one from China. But they didn't do it. They didn't manage to take it over. And so this is kind of where a lot of like Japanese identity kind of started to, as a nation, Japan became like a, unified in some sense, right? This is well before the Edo Jidai and like when Nobunaga and all that stuff started to unify the country in that way. But I think what the Mongol invasions did was give the Japanese something to fight against, right? Which I think is a really big thing because at that time, it wasn't necessarily the Sengoku at the time, right? But the shogunate was still kind of fractured, right? It didn't really have a strong hold on the entire country because if you think about it, Japan's a very mountainous country, lots of islands, lots of rivers and stuff like that to divide things together, right?
No Wi-Fi, so they couldn't talk to each other.
Exactly, yeah. So, yeah, no airdrop.
Yeah, no airdrop.
Yeah.
Huh?
And so, how do you unify a country? Well, you have to have a common enemy.
Yeah.
And I think what the Mongol invasions did was tell the Japanese, no, you can't be fighting inward like this. You have other bigger fish to fry, if you want to call it that, right? And so the Mongols attacked northern Kyushu, and they lost.
Dang!
They lost.
Wait, was this like a naval battle or?
Well, they landed on like a few islands, like Tsushima, right? Was one of the islands they landed on. Another one was Iki, I think. So they landed on these islands in the Tsushima Strait, and as well as the northern Kyushu, I think mainland, I think got there too. But this is when like the samurai became like, they're like a serious class of people not to be messed with. And so they managed to, hack them up. You know that game, Ghost of Tsushima? Yeah. That was based during the Mongol invasions.
What?
Yeah.
We all know that, samurai swords have a +2 against cavalry, so of course they're gonna win.
Exactly. And they give you a +5 agility bonus,
That's right. Yeah, the curved blade, easy to dismount all those
yeah.
Mongolians. There we go.
Right.
モンゴルはフビライ・ハーンの時代。
Yeah. Kublai Khan, right?
違う。日本語はフビライ・ハーンで覚える。
Okay, well, in English, it's spelled Kublai Khan.
そうなんや。
Yeah. So another cool thing about the Mongol invasion is that it was the first time they used gunpowder outside of Asia, and so they used like bombs, like the first like grenades were used during the Mongol
the
invasion.
Japanese?
Yeah. No, by the Mongols.
Oh, by
いや
Mongol.
Yeah.
絶対勝てなくない？こっちそんなんないでしょ。
Yeah, because gunpowder was invented in China, right?
Yeah.
And then I think Mongols were there around that time, and so they took these inventions, these gunpowder inventions, they made these like bombs, these like square.
Weaponizing.
Yeah. They weaponized it, and then they threw them at us. The point is that like these invasions kind of introduced a new technology for uses of war, which I think is pretty cool.
It's cool how it just united Japan like as a unit instead of being separate with all the different shogunates that existed at the
Well,
time.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like when you meet someone for the first time, but then you hate the same person, you're instantly buddies.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
then
have a
you're
common
friends.
enemy. Yeah. The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
ちょっと調べてみたら今、日本の矢の射程距離届く範囲はその時100メートル足らずくらいだったんだけど、モンゴルの弓は200メートルいってたんですよ。
Oh.
しかもその矢には毒が塗ってあって手榴弾みたいなのもあって、日本は1対1でこう戦うみたいなのが結構主流だったから、我こそはっつって一人で行く時にそれがパパパパパパって言って結構もうすごい苦戦をしてたと。3万の兵がこう攻めてきた。僕がちょっと知ってる知識で言うと、神風、日本に有利な嵐が起こって追い返すことができたっていう話がね結構有名なんだけど、最近では嵐は起きなかったんじゃないかなみたいな話もなんか有名になりつつあって、嵐じゃないっていう説もあるんだけど、まあでもモンゴルの軍では日本の武士が思ってたより意外に強くて、このまま戦いが長引けばやられてしまうので戻ろうっていうような会議も開かれたって記録されてるらしい。
What?
まあだからやっぱり日本の武士が強いっていう。
Right. Yeah.
Oh.
Again, like 1200 AD is like a long time ago. So whether these things like actually happened, I think is like up for debate. Like there may have been a storm, maybe there hasn't been a storm, maybe there was something else that happened and it was just morphed into just through like oral history or whatever into thinking that it was a storm or something. We don't actually know. But whether it happened or it didn't happen is besides the point. Whatever happened was some event happened that prevented the Mongols from invading further. And I think this, like you said, divine intervention signaled to the Japanese that, oh, we are a special people. We are protected by some kind of higher power that's protecting us from foreign invaders. And I think that kind of made the Japanese realize, like, we're not just Asian. We're Japanese, right? We're not Chinese. We're not those fucking Mongols, dude. We're not Koreans. We're Japanese. And so we're a different stock. We have a different DNA. We're a different, racially speaking, I think they thought at the time we're a different stock of people. But what I think the other thing that the invasions did is tell the Japanese that we had to be careful about who we let into our country. And so it was during that time that, sakoku as an official policy didn't start until later, but the ideas that influenced the official policy of sakoku started with the Mongol invasions is something that I've read.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because that was the first time that Japan experienced a true external threat, right? Japan was trading between China and Korea and the other countries for many years before that, but like I don't think they were ever invaded until that point. Significant in like our consciousness of like samurai, like these like powerful warriors. They fended off the Mongols.
一個困ったことがあったらしくて、今まではさ、戦争に勝ったら相手の土地をもらえるとかっていう褒美があったんだけど、
Right.
モンゴル追い返しても今までとこんなでっかい土地戦争勝ったらもらえるようだったのが、ちょっとだけしかもらえなくて、
頑張ったのに。
そうそうそう。
That was the Mongol invasions でした。
Wow.
次、
Meiji
Meiji Restoration.
All right.
明治維新ね。
Yeah, this is massive.
Very
Huge.
massive.
Huge. So when did it happen? Fuji, go. 1860?
88.
Very good. The Meiji Restoration happened. Fun fact, Canada received its independence in 1867.
Oh.
1 year after Canada became a country, Japan had a massive transformation from a feudal society, and then they put the emperor at the top again, gave him power, and then we said, no, we're no longer going to be in a feudal system anymore, feudal country anymore. We're going to have elections, we're going to have a parliament, we're going to have a diet, parliament, same thing, and then we're going to be a democratic society with rights and privileges that are extended to people. not just to the people at the top kind of thing. What is the idea? Why is this cool? Why, from a gaijin no kankaku, why is this interesting? Because I think for many years, especially in the 19th century, people saw Japan as a really like backward country, right?
Yeah,
They
that's
saw
why it goes on the opposite direction.
Yeah, it goes the opposite direction. They're on the other side of the world. Duh. That was when sakoku was an official policy, right? They didn't really trade with many people. They could trade with some people in certain areas, but they were confined. They couldn't really integrate within Japanese society. There wasn't really many immigrants or colonies like what was happening in China. And so I think the Japanese at the time, before the Meiji Restoration, was looking at China and seeing what was happening, right? Opium wars, the carve up of China, all the European powers taking Chinese land and addicting the population with opium and doing really, really terrible stuff in China. And the Japanese thought, we're not gonna let that happen. We don't wanna end up like China. So what do? We're gonna adopt Western practices, Western ways of thinking, Western technologies, and try to be the one and the same as the West, which I think was the major goal during the Meiji Restoration. For Japan to be seen as an equal among the Western countries, which was, they were the ones that were basically governing the world, how things were going in the world at the time. And so, もうちょっと具体的に言うと massive industrialization, right? Factories, intense weaponization. They were making weapons, they were making factories, they were making materials within the country. And these techniques were, again, taken from already industrialized countries like the UK and the United States. But they did it with like a Japanese spin on it, which I think is really interesting. So what this did, basically, the significance of it, like I said before, it brought Japan into the new age kind of thing. It brought Japan up to speed with the rest of the countries, with the rest of the other countries. But what Japan was always trying to do during this time was they're trying so hard to be seen as one and the same as these other countries. But they didn't let that happen. The West never let Japan become an equal, which is a big problem. And they didn't like that. And I don't like that. And I still don't like that. So, but you'll see if you follow the history from the Meiji Restoration up until World War II, there are very, very clear links and connections between how the West treated Japan after the Meiji Restoration and the reasons why the war broke out in the Pacific.
1853年にアメリカのペリーっていうとこが日本に開国を求めて近代的な圧倒的な西洋の力っていうのをその時に見せたから、もうそこは従わざるを得なかったというところで、しかしこのまま日本が弱いままだとこれ良くない。で、さっき言ってたけど力をつけることによって植民地になることを逃れる。この時は遅れを取ってた西洋諸国にも認められるようになったみたいな大きな一つの転換点なんで、それがこの短い期間でできたのはものすごいという回でございます。
Yeah, I think like the rate at which they managed to industrialize is like only matched by Japan's post-war recovery after the war. Like I think those two periods is when Japan experienced the most like growth in terms of like economic growth and like population growth. Right, it's really, really remarkable stuff. I think the world was like, man, what's Japan doing? What are they eating? What are they feeding these people? Like, what is it about the Japanese mind that managed to develop so quickly?
選択的な西洋化というか、混ざっていくわけじゃん、西洋のね。ただもう全部西洋になるわけじゃなくて、例えば憲法とか軍隊の仕組みは西洋式を取り入れたけど、でも天皇を中心にするっていう考え方はやっぱ日本のそれを残したままっていうところで、なんか和洋折衷ではないけど、なんか混ざってる感じっていうのが他にないんじゃないかなっていう感じがするよね。
Right.
If you were to live in that era, you'd see on the street people who would wear Western clothing at the same time that other people were still wearing like the kimono. And you
yeah, I mean that'll probably be closer to more the turn of the century, right? Of course, I mean like it wasn't just like a sudden transition, like everyone stop wearing kimono, we're wearing suits from now on. Like it wasn't like that, right?
だから日本の結婚式もお父さんお母さんはお父さんがタキシードでお母さんは着物でしたね。
混ざってる。
Yeah.
それ本当に全部西洋あれって日本語。
Hang on. Yeah, no, so it's a really interesting era because like you think of Japan and then people thought of Japan as like this really super Asian country. I mean it is, but like it's like stuck in the past and they don't want to advance or modernize themselves. And then in the span of like 40 years, they're like the preeminent superpower in Asia. Incredible, right? Let's not talk about the war and stuff like that. But like, I mean, just, in terms of like pure facts, like Japan was the power in Asia, coming from an isolated country. That's incredible stuff.
It's great when you can make decisions really fast. It's like if you
Yeah.
look at it from an American perspective, there's just too many opinions that exist.
Yeah.
And
I don't
nothing,
like that.
Yeah, and nothing probably gets done. But then Japanese people, they find more efficiency if just everybody goes with one idea. Okay, let's all do it together.
Right,
and it
right,
seems
yeah.
that their ability to atsumaru and just to like work
Consensus.
together
Yeah.
and consolidate each other's like ideas about change for the future, it's just much faster.
Yeah.
That's what they say about the demerits of democracy.
That's right. Yep.
The people are
We the people. Actually, no.
Meiji Restoration でした。
Meiji Restoration.
次 Atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Oh,
I think this is the first time we're actually talking about it on this channel.
I think the reason why I chose this is for basically one reason. Japan is the only country that was victim to an atomic weapon.
Yeah.
And not just one, but two.
That's right.
Right? And within the same week. Right? First atomic bomb was dropped from the Enola Gay on August 6th, 1945, to get that right. And that was the first time an atomic weapon was used in the world against another country.
Yeah.
And how do you respond to that? Up until then, Japan was firebombed, and they understood like what a bomb was. They knew what a fire was. They can kind of understand like this is what's happening, right? But when one single bomb from one plane causes that much destruction, like how do you even wrap your mind around that? Like us as like 21st century people, we've seen the science, we've seen how history is played out, so we can kind of understand like okay, this is how the bomb was made, and this the United States took all these scientists from Germany to like make.
Manhattan Project.
Yeah, the Manhattan Project to like build this bomb, and then they used it against Japan. But like, how do you even, as a Japanese person living at that time, like how do you even like wrap your mind around this, right? And so I think the reason why this is such a big deal for Japan is like not only just they had the bomb dropped on them, but I think because they got the bombs dropped on them is the reason why Japan has such a strong feeling towards nuclear weapons.
Right.
And nuclear energy as a whole. So like many countries and activists like are against nuclear energy and nuclear weapons, but like I feel like because Japan's the only victim of a bomb is the reason why they feel like we should probably stop to it, or we should reel it in, right? But from like a bigger like historical significance perspective, after the bombs were dropped, it ushered in a whole new era of weapons technology. That's when the Cold War started between the U.S. and the Soviet Union,
Right.
and that's when the arms race of like nuclear stockpile happened, and eventually the space race happened because of that. And so just because of these two bombs that were dropped did the entire world change, not just for Japan but for everyone else.
Yes.
And
Because
Japan
we could pretty much wipe out ourselves.
yeah right
With that kind of firepower.
And that's kind of like the issue we're running into, right? Well, we were running into during the Cold War, and it's now still, right, with like the mutually assured destruction.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, obviously terrible dark time in history, and some people will try to justify it and say, "Oh, it was a good thing they dropped it because it stopped the war." You never know that.
No.
That's all speculative history. You can never really truly know what would or would not happen if this didn't happen or did happen. You have to take history as a fact-driven discipline. You have to take it as the evidence shows. So the reality is, bombs were dropped, and this, the atomic age basically happened from there. And terrible thing that happened. Hundreds of thousands of people died just from the blast itself and from radiation afterwards. And atomic bomb testing happened well beyond that. So shame. It's too bad, yeah.
やっぱり広島出身だからさ、
Right.
もう多分どの県よりもちゃんと教育というか、いろいろ勉強する、原爆ドームから始まるけど、授業の時間帯も結構取るんだよね、そういう時間を。唯一の被爆国。だから今後の、この歴史を通じて世界に生きていけばいいなって個人的に思うのよ。ちょっと逆に気になるのが、みんなの国でこの勉強するときに歴史をね、原爆のことについてってどんな感じで扱われる？
It's written from a very subjective perspective. I think in the war, I think that a lot of history books, especially when I was growing up, I don't know how it is right now. I know that a lot of things are changing in history, but I only can speak from a personal experience of what I was taught in school. Pretty much the gist of everything is that, of course, the atomic bombs were a terrible thing to do to Japan. But overall, Japan, they forfeited the war and America won. That's basically the gist of what's written in all history books. It's like after the drums were popped, then the war finally ended and America ended the war, which I think is a totally biased way to look at history books as a whole. And I personally don't agree with that. It's probably true to an extent, but I think after living in Japan for so long, it's more than just America winning, right? If we can even call it that at this point. But that's what I was taught in school and what I remember from history books. It's not an opinion I agree with, but that's what we talked about. Just want everybody to know that, okay?
Yeah.
And I feel like in a lot of books, in a lot of history books in Romania too, the way it's phrased, it's America dropped the bomb in Japan in order to end the war.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like the main like justification that you see a lot.
Correct.
In history books too.
Something else to add was that in regular history class as an American, they touch up on the issue between the US and Japan. They don't really show that grotesque imagery of what happened. Of course, people were affected by radioactive poisoning after the fact. But when I really learned about the gravity on which the bomb affected the Japanese people was actually in my Japanese language class. I think my Japanese teacher showed us very different imagery, such as like hara ashi no gen, right? That was probably a very important day for me to really realize how much damage that America caused to Japan, right? And I didn't actually get to know it until there was a person from Japan teaching me about the history that happened in there. So I'm really thankful that I took it in high school because I not only learned about the language, but I learned about all of the history that actually happened in Japan as opposed to just a light touch inside of my regular history class.
ちょっとなんかチープな終わり方になるけど、こうやって仲良くできたらいいよね。
そうね。
なんかね、まあまあまあ。
Yeah,
はい、
let's.
I hate you.
こいつよっぽどトピックでそれ言ってきたな。はい。
はい
ということで、
Atomic bombs でした。次、
ブブンブン。
Battle of Tsushima.
Okay.
So,
Love this game.
yeah, so basically the Battle of Tsushima was like the decisive battle that allowed Japan to win against Russia in the Russo-Japanese War from 1904 to 1905. Woohoo. Basically just why this is a big deal. Japan wiped the floor, destroyed Russia's Baltic fleet. Yeah. So this is a very silly thing that the Russians did. So basically the Russo-Japanese War was fought over the Korean Peninsula and Manchuria, current-day Manchuria and current-day Korea. And so Japan had naval supremacy at the time. And Russia didn't really have much of a naval presence in that area.
Mistake number one, huh?
So what they do, they had their navy stationed in the Baltic Sea, which is, if you look at a map, way on the opposite side of the continent, right? So what they do, they're like, we're going to get those Japanese. We're going to send our ships over there. Starting in October 1905, they sent their boats all the way around through the North Sea, down over through the Horn of Africa and over South Africa like this, Cape Town, through the Indian Ocean, and then finally made it to the Sea of Japan and the Straits of Tsushima in 1905. It took like 7 months to get there.
Yeah.
And so, and if you think about it, 7 months at sea is exhausting.
Yes.
You are not going to be fresh by the time you get there. But Japan, neighbors, right? They're right there.
They're just chilling.
Yeah, they're chilling. They're there, ready to go. They didn't have as many ships. They didn't have as many people, but the people were fresh. And they had more modern weapons. Their boats were more agile or whatever.
Yeah.
So basically, the main move that happened is that the Japanese caught them, not by surprise, but they caught them in a really vulnerable position. And so the Russian ships were kind of going in a line like this, and the Japanese ships, they went this way, which
Nice, cut 'em off.
is called crossing the T, right? Crossing the T, because it makes a T shape. And so what this does is this allows these boats here, the Japanese boats, to point all their guns, all 4 of their guns or whatever, in this one direction. But Russia can only use their front guns if they're in this line, right? So it was like 2 guns versus like 8. And then, boom, Russia lost that battle. I think Russia lost like 5,000 people. I think Japan lost 120.
Wow.
Yeah.
T 字戦法ってやつ。
Yeah.
なんか多分東郷平八郎さんっていう、
Yeah, right.
方
Yeah.
がこの戦法をこうやろうって言い出して。
It's a really big, serious moment for Japan that allowed Japan to win the war. But like I was saying in the Meiji Restoration section, even though Japan won the war, there were people during the Treaty of Portsmouth, which is the thing that ended the war between Japan and Russia. There were arguments that Japan should have won all these concessions and stuff like that because they won the war. But Teddy Roosevelt, who won a Nobel Prize for this, Teddy Roosevelt, who mediated the treaty between Japan and Russia, he basically was like, no, Japan, we're not going to let you get all these things. And we're going to let Russia, who was a European power, keep a lot of the things that they earned or whatever, right? And so that pissed them off, right?
Of course.
So it's going to make Japan angry. And the same thing, ever since then, Japan had been kind of a bit of a pariah in the international community. And then that led to further militarization, further alienation from the international community, and then eventually it led to World War II. Maybe it's not that clean of a transition, but the point is,
Start from somewhere.
had to start from somewhere. I think you can probably trace it to that point. But with all that being said, what this did, though, is that it put Japan on a status of major power, right? That's the first time an Asian country beat a major European, a white country. And that's like a serious thing from like a Western perspective, because whether we like it or not, the reality of it is there is a lot of racism, racial prejudice that comes when it comes to like thinking about how capable a country is. And I think during the 20th century, especially the early 20th century, the United States saw Japan as like they're an Asian country, they're not going to be able to do anything. They can't beat Russia. The entire world bet against Japan, and what did Japan do?
They won.
And I still think there's like a lot of like racism still lingering in the Western community online now, because I'll read things online that say things like, yeah, Japan won the Russo-Japanese War, but just barely.
Just
No, they didn't. They
5,000 against
steamrolled.
100.
Like, what does that even mean? Like, yeah, just barely. They barely just won. It's like, why is this even a thing? Like, obviously, it was a destructive war. A war is never really a clean thing, except for maybe like Gulf War. Nice. You know, it was obviously a destructive war for both Japan and Russia, but Japan still won. So I don't really see why there's these arguments of, oh, Japan barely won. Like, it doesn't matter.
It's
They
win,
won.
win, yeah.
Yeah,
They won.
I don't really see why these discussions need to take place.
Yeah.
Point is, Japan was elevated to status of actual serious power that the international community had to take seriously. Yeah.
If you're gonna attack in a cone, you're gonna have overall higher DPS than someone who's just been chilling for 7 months. So of course they're gonna win.
Yeah.
その時アジアの国にさ、大国西洋のロシアとかに勝てる国がまあどれだけあったのかって話よね。
Yeah, right. Think about how big Russia is. How many people Russia had. How many access to resources that Russia had. And look at tiny, small Japan.
そうね。
We came out on top.
That's right. Don't attack the Japanese at their game that they've been living for most of their lives as an island country.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
If they live on an island, of course they're going to be good at making ships.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to attack like this big land mass where like, we have guns, we can win. No, you can't win at sea. You're not going to beat the seamen at their game.
有名な戦法があるって統合ターンっていう統合平八郎さん
Togo-tan.
で普通はこうすれ違いざまにバババババッとこう攻撃するんだけど、そこで急にターンするからなんで帰んのここまで来てどういうことって言ったらこう T 字になって攻撃されるみたいな。
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
really
It's really
cool.
like in terms of like naval military history, this is like one of the battles that frequently comes up in terms of like significance. So
It's all tactics, huh?
Yeah,
Man,
it's
they're
all
professional
tactics, yeah.
at their tactics, dude.
yeah.
まあね、戦争をねOK ってしてるわけじゃないんですけど一応だけ言わせてきます。
Battle Tsushima でした。
So,
はい、ということで今日は日本だけの歴史上の出来事についてアーロン先生に話していただきました。ありがとうございました。
こちら皆さんありがとうございました。
thank you, Aaron, so much.
やっぱり今回も普通に勉強になりましたし、私も調べながらなんでアーロンあんなの調べずに普通にペラペラ喋れるみたいな本当にねパソコン見てないからありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。こちらこそ。
It's really interesting. I feel like all of these history guys have made me more understanding of just the Japanese people as a whole, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And instead of looking at it from an American perspective, I can understand why they would say this certain comment that would be offensive to an American, but actually they're coming from a country that was built on this history, and it comes from that. So it's made me more accepting of more Japanese opinions, right?
Right,
Because
right.
we have these history lessons, and so arigatou.
Yeah. No, one comment I'll make. I saw a comment in one of the other videos that like everything that we've been saying is said from a Western perspective, and I want to say, yeah, no shit.
Yes, that's right.
まあそうね。
Where
そりゃ
are
そう
you
よ
from?
そりゃそうよ。
Well, not
Where
no
are we
shit, but like
from,
yeah,
okay?
of course. Like that's the whole point of these videos is that like to talk about Japanese history from a Western perspective to illuminate to the average Japanese person why their history is so interesting. And but if you want, like you were saying, Byron, like to get a really true understanding of Japanese history, reading just English sources or Western sources, I mean, you will obviously learn a lot. But the best way to do it is to learn Japanese, learn old Japanese, and then read primary source material. Obviously, that hurdle is for reserved for that type of work is usually reserved for academics, real Japanese historians who are fluent in Japanese or Japanese people who are historians of their own country.
日本人目線でね、日本の歴史紹介してもね、僕らのチャンネルの価値じゃないと思うよね。やっぱりいろんな目線、国の目線から日本の歴史を紐解いた時にどう感じているかとか、そういう比較とかが面白いと思うんで、続けもちろんこれはこのまま続けますけれども、ただちょっとこう事実が違ったみたいなところは優しく教えてください。お願いします。ちょっときつめに言うんじゃなくてコメント欄で優しく教えてください。他に僕らに話してほしい、歴史のねトピックとかあればコメント欄よろしくお願いします。
お願いします。
それでは次の動画でまたお会いしましょう。バイバイ。チャンネル
登録
お願い
し
ます。